So today, we're going to take a journey into probably the ultimate mystery, your own consciousness. And we're going to go beyond just the science of it to explore a really practical way to actually map the landscape of your own inner world.
Let's just start with a really big question, one that sits right on the edge of what we think of as science and philosophy. Why isn't all of this, the universe, just a bunch of particles and energy interacting silently in the dark? Why do we have an inner life at all? That question is really the heart of the puzzle we're exploring.
Now, to even begin to wrap our heads around a question that big, we first need to understand what scientists and philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. And that phrase, it just perfectly captures the essence of this whole mystery. The person who really gave this question its modern name is the philosopher David Chalmers. Back in the mid-90s, he basically drew a line in the sand, and he very clearly separated the problem science was getting good at solving from the one it couldn't seem to touch.
And here is the key distinction he made. On one side, he put what he called the easy problems. Now, of course, they're not actually easy at all. They're incredibly complex. But in theory, they're solvable. They're all about mechanism, how the brain's machinery processes information, how memory works, that kind of stuff. But on the other side is the hard problem. Why does all that machinery produce an inner world in the first place? Why does it feel like something to be you?
You know, this raw feel of experience, it actually has a name, qualia. It's the taste of coffee, the feeling of a warm blanket, the sound of your favorite song. Science can map all the brain activity that happens with these experiences, but it can't explain the experience itself. It can tell you everything about the wavelength of red light, but it can't explain the redness of red. So if science kind of hits a wall trying to explain all this from the outside, how can we possibly explore our inner world from the inside? Well, this leads us to two very different but equally valid ways of knowing. There's this classic saying that just perfectly captures this idea. Measuring something is not the same as experiencing it. A map can describe a landscape in perfect detail, but it can never, ever contain the feeling of the wind on your face or the smell of the forest. And this gives us our two different approaches. You've got the third-person scientific view, which uses measurement to create a map of the brain, but then you have the first-person view, your direct, subjective experience. And that, well, that is the territory. It's the landscape you can explore just by paying attention to your own mind. And this right here is what's so empowering. We don't have to sit around and wait for science to solve the hard problem. We can use first-person observation right now to get familiar with the patterns of our own consciousness. We can become, in a very real sense, cartographers of our own inner worlds. Okay, so if we're going to be cartographers of our own minds, what are we looking for? What's on the map? Well, if you observe your inner experience closely for a while, a natural pattern starts to show itself. It's a cycle that can really help us navigate our inner lives with more clarity. So for our purposes, let's call it the collapse coherence cycle. So how does this cycle actually work? Well, it usually starts with a feeling of pressure and chaos. You know, that internal tension from worry or stress or just life. The really critical turning point is what we're calling the collapse. This is that moment of surrender, of just letting go of the need to control everything. Once we stop resisting, that allows for integration. We stop fighting the difficult feelings and just let them be there. And then finally, from that space of acceptance, coherence naturally emerges. It's this calm, clear state that just kind of shows up when our inner system finally settles down. This idea is really at the heart of the whole cycle. The moment the mind shifts from trying to solve an experience to simply seeing it, that's when the whole process can unfold on its own. It's truly about seeing, not solving. Now, I know what you might be thinking. The word collapse sounds pretty negative, right? But in this model, it's actually the most important step. It is not about failure or giving up. It's about releasing that rigid, white-knuckled control. It's that moment the mind finally stops fighting reality. And that surrender, that's the very doorway to a calmer, more coherent state of being. So what's the big takeaway here? How do we actually use this map in our day-to-day lives? Well, it all comes down to learning how to ride the waves of life instead of constantly trying to fight the current. Because what you start to see is that chaos and calm, or pressure and clarity, they aren't opposites fighting each other. They're two parts of the exact same natural rhythm. Our inner life has peaks and it has valleys. And just understanding that this pattern even exists, that can change everything. And this gets to the true role of awareness. It is not a tool to flatten the ocean, to stop the waves from ever coming. No way. It's the skill that allows us to ride the waves of emotion and thought, trusting that the ocean will eventually become still again all on its own. And here's the really practical part. Just by learning to recognize this cycle as it happens inside you, you start to move through it with so much more ease. The struggle gets less, not because the waves get any smaller, but because you get so much better at riding them. So, we'll leave you with a question to take with you. Using this map we've talked about, just take a look at your own inner world. Where are you in the cycle? What pattern are you noticing? Right now.